Good evening.
Good evening.
So glad that you're joining us today online and in various ways that you're coming to us. Hopefully we have a PowerPoint soon so that we can study together. But while they're getting that PowerPoint up, let me say that I'm very thankful to be here in the real capital of Kentucky. You know, because I came into town and a lot of people say, how do you say the capital of Kentucky? Is it Louisville or Louisville? And the answer, of course, is Frankfort. Okay, and so I'm glad to be here with you. So we don't know where, okay, yes, there we are. Let's talk a little bit about doubt, first of all. Doubt is not necessarily a bad thing. A lot of people think, well, doubting Thomas, that's a bad thing. It could be a bad thing. Your doubt could actually take you away from God, or it could take you to God. So, but one way or the other, if you never had any doubts about it, I doubt your faith would be worth very much to you. So when we think about doubt, it's not an inherently bad thing. I view it as being instrumental, like this remote here. It's an instrument. All right, so doubt is an instrument to take you one place or the other. Besides that, doubt comes in a lot of different categories. You can have doubt, for instance, that was by nature philosophical. In other words, it's pretty doubt because you took a philosophy class and somebody messed you up and you no longer believe in God. My PhD is in philosophy and I'm at the University of Tennessee. And so there, most of my teachers were atheists. And a lot of the kids that I went to school with, graduate school, were atheists. So sometimes your doubts might be philosophical and sometimes they might be psychological. In other words, something bad happens to you. There's been a death in the family. There's been a car wreck. There's been whatever it is. And then all of a sudden, you find yourself questioning God and then those sorts of things. So doubts could come into a number of different ways. First of all, they're not wrong in and of themselves. And secondly, they could be induced by trauma, like we were talking about, or they could be philosophical in nature. But one way or the other, if you doubt, it's important to you. So in and of itself, it's not a bad thing. Oh, by the way, doubt could also be rebellion. In other words, if your parents are strong Christians, and in a sense you're saying, hey, I am who I am. And one way to express that is that, well, Mom, Dad, I'm not exactly where you are on that. So there's a lot of different reasons for having doubts, and I have not exhausted them all. Now, in the time that we have here, which is very, very short, in the time that we have here, we're going to just hit some high points about doubt. We're going to hit some high points, about faith. Let me see if I can figure out where this is. Yep. Nope, not working. Okay, what do I do here? Pushing there we go. Christian notices, prepared to answer. So, can you prove that God exists? Well, it depends on what you mean by proof. Now, if you mean empirical proof, then the answer is going to be no. Many people here, I don't want to remember this, but some of us are. When the Russian cosmonaut went out into outer space, he said, I knew there was no God. Well, duh. I mean, did you really think that by getting into a spaceship that you're somehow or other going to see God? And the answer would be no. All right, so how do you prove anything? Well, when you prove something, it means to give evidence for whatever it is that you believe to be true. Now, this might be empirical in nature, or it could be non-empirical. I happen to believe in love, and love is a non-empirical thing. Just did a marriage seminar in Mesa, Arizona, and came back last night. And in this seminar, we talked a lot about love and loyalty and faithfulness, all of which are non-empirical concepts. But yet we believe in them. So, can you prove that God exists? Yes, but if you're looking for empirical proof that will say, well, God, you're here right here in front of me and I see you now, then you're not going to see that until Jesus comes back. Oh, by the way, when Jesus comes back, the opportunity for changing your mind is going to be nil. Nothing, my bank account. Okay, it's nothing. Okay, you will have no opportunity at that point. Now, I'm going to guess a little bit into the mind of God here, and this is a little bit iffy. Why did God make it such that we had to have faith in order to reach Him? Hebrews 11 verse 1. Well, there's an idea called epistemic distance. And that means if God was right here in front of you, first of all, it probably would remove, in this context, our freedom of choice. Do you remember what happened to Peter in Matthew chapter 18 when he sees Jesus and it says, though he lost his freedom of choice, he says, wow, let's build 3 tabernacles. Peter, you couldn't get that. Why in the world would you reach that conclusion when you know that there's but one church? Why you knew that in chapter 16. Now, why in chapter 18 are you a blithering doodah. I mean, all of a sudden, I don't know what you can use on the internet. Okay, but I am saying, why in the world don't you understand this? All right, so I'm thinking to you, all right, God can be so much in front of you that there's no opportunity for faith and there's no opportunity for your free choice. So to say that he's in the right epistemic distance is to say that he's not so close to us to overwhelm us, and he's not so far away from us that we cannot find him. If we do, if we seek, we certainly can find him. So indicating that he's the right place, that's what we're talking about with regard to why I think that God does not just immediately show himself now. He will immediately show himself now, but you and I have to go through a probation period in this earth. And during this time, we are on probation. How much time do you have? Well, Evan, I met you a while ago. I don't know. How long are you going to live? I don't know. Kurt, how long are you going to live? I don't know. It's like here recently, my wife retired, and so our CPA dude was, I was saying to him, well, should we take this route or this route? And he said, I don't know. Tell me when you're going to die. Okay, I don't know. All right, so I'm kind of thinking, all right, so here's the point about this. If you knew that Jesus was going to come back when you were 83 years old, then you would probably live like the devil for 82 years, and on that 83rd year, you'd come to the Lord. So you are in a probation period before you see God. This is the time that your soul grows. This is the time that you make choices. This is, as one writer said, a veil of soul making. This is God's environment for developing souls. Sometimes it's pleasant and wonderful place to live in, and sometimes there's cancer and a lot of other things. I understand you're discussing that tomorrow night. So preparing to answer. All right, if God exists, all right, can you prove it? Here I go with the possibility of proving something. All right, so I think it's a four-step process. Number one, all right, if you can know that God exists, and if you can show that the Bible is the Word of God, and you can show that the Bible teaches a certain thing to be true, then number four, you can have full confidence in whatever it is the Bible says. Let me say that again. If you can show that God exists, if you can show the Bible is His Word, if you show the Bible teaches a certain thing to be true, then whatever the Bible says to be true is indeed true. Now, I sometimes teach my students this. If God does not exist, He wrote no book and He has no son. All right, if God does not exist, He wrote no book and He has no son. Makes no difference. You can't just have to use the Bible to prove that God exists. No, you won't. Why? Because why are you using the Bible? Well, the Bible's God's Word. That's called circular reasoning now, isn't it? Very obvious that you can't do that. So you show that God exists, and then you show the Bible is from God, and then you show that the Bible really does teach what you claim it teaches, then you have a right to say, I believe that to be true. All right, continuing further, here are the families for arguments for the existence of God. We're going to have to hit this really quick, so we're going to boil this down. This is a 15-week course in like 10 minutes. All right, so here we're going to be doing that as we look about. First of all, I just got a brand new picture because yesterday, day before yesterday, we're at a place in Arizona called Tortilla Flats, and there's a place there where supposedly the lost Dutchman was killed on this spot because he had a gold mine, and people have been looking for it ever since. Well, I didn't find it either. Okay, but we were there, and there was this old country store-like thing, and there was this wooden Indian on the front, so I thought just, day before yesterday, I just kind of take this picture. I hadn't edited it much. Maybe you can see it. It's a wooden Indian on front of a store. All right, in this particular case, I'm going to call him Octum. Okay, that's his name, Octum. Okay, now why do I call him that? Because I'm trying to remember these arguments for the existence of God. And what are they? They're ontological. I don't know what that is. They're ontological, cosmological, teleological, and moral. All right, so here are your four families of arguments. I saw a guy in Mesa, Arizona this weekend who was my student from 83 to 87, and he still remembered Octum. All right, he still remembered Octum because there's something about it. Won't remember me, but maybe you remember the arguments for the existence of God. I'm not going to do the O, but I want to do the C and the T and the M. Cosmological arguments have to do with cause. A cosmologist is a person who studies cause. What's the cause of this? And what's the cause of this? And what's the cause of this? A teleologist studies design. Meaning, okay, what is the purpose for which this thing has been built? What is the design of it? And then thirdly, there are the moral arguments. I'm going to outline these for you, but really it takes a good while to go into these. But we're going to give you the cliff notes on this. All right, so what would be the cause arguments? Okay, here's the problem that you have if you are an evolutionist. Once you start looking at this thing causing this thing causing this thing causing this thing, there is no place to stop. So let's say then they claimed in South Africa to have found some more human ancestors in a cave there. He doesn't look like my ancestor, but let's get on to the point. Okay, so the point then is, okay, let's say then that human beings are here and that there has only been life on this planet for 12% of the time if this planet is 4.6 billion years old. All right, so then that means if I want to find out, well, where did rap come from? Like just the little boy who said to his mother, Mama, where did I come from? And so she thought, this is the time. Okay, now I've been dreading this conversation. So she sat down and she explained the biology of the whole situation. And so the little boy said to his mother, that's very interesting, Mother, but I got a friend at school that came from Toledo. Okay, so where did I come from? All right, so whenever you think of the idea of coming from, let's say then that you are an evolutionist and you believe that the first human beings came 2 or 3 billion years ago. And whether or not they were Australopithecines or whatever they were anthropoid-like creatures. They were like man. And so let's go back 2 or 3 million years. Okay, now that I'm representing this because I don't want to walk 2 or 3 miles. Okay, so let's say that 2 or 3 million years. Now, where did they come from? Well, they came from lower life forms as well, maybe from other mammals. All right, so I get this. But where did the mammals come from? Well, eventually, maybe the mammals were reptiles. But where'd they come from? Well, they came from those animals that were vertebrates. But where'd they come from? They came from animals that were invertebrates. But where'd they come from? They came from one-celled organisms that might have been like paramecia or something like that. But where'd they come from? Well, there was a time when everything was just right, and it was whamming. Water vapor, hydrogen, ammonia, methane, and nitrogen, and the combination of all that got together, and voila, Walmart. Okay, so you got it, and where did that come from? Okay, well, we got all these prebiotic things and all these things that constitute life. Where that came from? Okay, now let's go all the way back to 4.6 billion years ago. Now that would be, of course, what many people think would be the age of the Earth. And where did the Earth come from? Well, the Earth came from the universe itself, which maybe started 11 to 14 billion years ago from the Big Bang. Jim Parsons. Okay, from the Big Bang. All right, so if it's the case, then it's a television show. All right, so whenever you think about the Big Bang, well, what was it that exploded and where did it come from? Well, we don't know. Well, I'm not going to let you stop there if you're going to get on this train. You got on this train for the long haul. And if you're going to get on this train and to say that this universe can't explain itself, then it is your job to explain it. If you're going to be the atheist, it is your job to explain it. Where did that come from? And where did that come from? And where did that come from? Now, as a Christian, I don't have to do that. Why? I believe that there was a necessary being that brought contingent things into existence. They brought them into existence. This, by the way, is called the Cosmological Argument for the existence of God. I've never seen anybody, and I have had debates with atheists before, but I've never seen anybody get over all these hurdles. By the way, some of you might know about the life of Antony Flew. Earlier in the 1970s, he actually debated Thomas B. Warren, one of our guys in the Church of Christ. And I don't know if that had anything to do with changing him, but before he died, he became a believer. And so the book that he wrote was, There Is No God, Strike Through, There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Changed His Mind. You couldn't find in the 20th century a better-known atheist than Antony Flew. And before he died, he became a theist. I don't think that he became a Christian, but he became a theist. And one thing that brought him there is that in his feeble voice, if you want to go to the internet and check this out, in his feeble voice, he will say something like this. Human DNA is just too complex, he will say, to explain without a creator. Well, it was also complex in the 1970s when he was an atheist. And it was also complex in the 1980s when he was an atheist. And in the 1990s when he was an atheist. When everybody was listening to his voice as though he were Richard Dawkins or one of those voices because he was so sure. Well, now, all of a sudden, after maybe 10 years, when we know that there are about 30,000 gene sequences in the DNA of human beings, we come to understand, wow, we can't explain where all that came from. And that's a cosmological argument. All right, here's the teleological argument. There's Charles Darwin, age 41. By the way, he was not ever trained in science, but he really wanted to go on the HMS Beagle, and so he had read science before, and he had this idea that he got from Gilbert Lyle about the evolution of things. And so he did wind up going to study the finches on the Galapagos Islands, and then he wrote Origin of the Species. Here are 3 barriers that I don't think anybody can get over if they are not a believer in God. Number 1, how do you explain the biological diversity that exists today with over 250 million species of plants and animals, all of which supposedly came from Rhynia, or all of the plants, or all of which came from Paramecia, or something like that, if you believe in animal evolution, and they all go back to hydrogen. This is not original to me, but I'm thinking of a guy at the Institute for Creation Research who says this. He says, hydrogen is an odorless, colorless, tasteless gas. When given time, becomes people. And I'm kind of thinking, no. That's not going to be the answer to how that happened. Because first of all, how are you going to explain biological diversity when, as a matter of fact, that's not the direction of things as Charles Darwin would talk about, from survival from those, from current characteristics. That's another point. Number 2, biochemical evolution means, all right, where did the chemicals come from which all things began to evolve? And number 3, how did the universe organize itself after the Big Bang? How did it do that? All right, so that would be those. Paul, by the way, used cosmological arguments in Acts 14, and he used them, here's a current day picture of Lystra, but when Paul used the arguments there, he was answering a guy who was actually a priest of the temple of Zeus. And he wanted to tell him about the one true and living God, and it wasn't Zeus. So, that was Acts 14. And then Paul at Mars Hill in Acts 17. This is kind of a contemporary picture of Mars Hill, where people about 600 yards away from the Acropolis can get on top of Mars Hill. And that you can see the Areopagus clearly from there, which would be the entire sacred temple area. All right, and so when he was there, it's named, by the way, Areopagites are named after Ares, the god of war. So whenever Paul used them in Acts 14, and he used them in Acts 17, he's doing the same thing that I am now. Doing the same thing that I am now. Which means, I believe that I got 5 minutes. Okay, so teleological arguments. All right, teleological arguments. Here's Ralph's play of the day. Some of you guys have been playing baseball today and came in and changed. Okay, so here you go. Here's the play of the day. All right, what is that? Is there purpose in the universe? Is there purpose in nature? Just Saturday, we're in the Arizona desert. It's 102 degrees, and they're thinking it feels comfortable, and I'm thinking, no. Okay, I'm thinking, even if it's just 20% humidity, did you hear the 3 digits, 102? And it's not hot in Arizona until it's 118, they said. In which case, you can fry eggs on your car hood. But I'm thinking it was a beautiful place, and so we're in the middle of a desert, and they were showing us the various cacti that are there, and the way that cacti learn to reproduce in a very sparse environment. There's a cactus plant called a jumper plant, and it seems to be attracted to warm-blooded animals, so that they say, do not get close to this. If it sticks to your skin, it'll be very difficult to pull out. And, however, if it sticks to your skin, you get to carry it somewhere else, and that plant gets to survive. Well, how did that plant figure out how to jump? If you're a spitting cobra, how did you figure out how to spit? If you are a maple leaf seed with a single appendage, how did you learn the principles of flight so that you could be carried off into the wind? If you are a sweet gum ball and you are covered with these sticky things that really hurt terribly if you're barefoot in your yard and you find some of these, how did that figure out how to do that? I'm kind of thinking there's a design there. There's purpose there. There's order in the universe. There's direction in the universe, and there's design. And I don't think that evolutionists can explain that without, here's the modern day biocore heart, and this is what it looks like inside a person. Actually, this is a diagram. This is a real picture. All right, so it doesn't adjust to adrenaline. There's a lot of things that it does not do, but it mimics the human heart. It allows some people to live. Now what? I wonder why it would be the case that the man-made heart is built by design, but the superior one, which is the human heart, is not. You take a very sophisticated mechanical hand, and people go, ooh, isn't that wonderful? Watch that. A mechanical hand built by design or not? This one's better. Do you know this one can feel a variation of a thousandth of an inch? So that if you rub your finger across this, you can tell the difference in variation of what's printed and what is not. Because this hand is superior. So the mechanical hand is built by design. This hand is not. Are you kidding? I know a lady in California about a month ago who had part of a liver transplant from her son-in-law. And 60% of the liver was taken out. 60% of the liver was taken out of the son-in-law and put inside of her. And in 6 weeks, they both will grow a full liver. Do you think that that's planned? Do you think that's design? And I have been known to just go to a doctor's office, like at a place, and just kind of say, look, I'll take pictures of orthopedic surgeons, Dr. Wynn raced recently because my wife hurt her shoulder. I just took pictures of the human hand. I took pictures of the human arm. I took pictures of the human finger, of how complex it is. And then I would challenge you to figure out how that evolved. I bet you can't. I bet there's no one listening who can do that. So it's time to quit this particular presentation, but I want to remind you something. The known universe is 5 billion light years in radius, and in terms of an exponent, that's 10 to the 26th power. Now, according to those who have understood that the human genome is about 30,000 gene sequences, the odds of the accidental assembly of the human genome is 10 to the negative 40,000th power, and that number looks like 10 of these charts. Because there are 4,000 zeros in this chart. I did this one day when I was really bored. Okay, all right, I put 4,000 zeros in this chart. So if you want to know what a number like 10 to the 40,000th power looks like, the artificial assembly of the human DNA is 10 of these charts. Oh, by the way, if you want to win a lottery, I don't know if you'll have Kentucky lottery or not, the odds of you winning a lottery would be about 7 of these zeros, depending on how many people bought tickets. So this is nothing like the number of winning the lottery. Okay, Brian, I got to quit. I didn't get it all down. But I tried. Where do you want to sit?
Well, I think we certainly appreciate how difficult the task was to try and answer such a difficult question with a limited amount of time. We did have a couple questions come in while you were speaking, and one of them is, what are the most common reasons you personally have heard given for doubting God's existence?
Well, I tried to mention 2 or 3 of them. I think that a lot of people doubt God's existence, first of all, because of inappropriate expectations. If you're wanting God to tap you on the shoulder and say hello, okay, that would mean that you're going to have problems because God is not in the shoulder tapping, that's not his job today, because the age of miracles, I believe, came to an end in the New Testament, at least those that were transferred by the laying on of the apostles' hands. So one thing would be that. Another thing is, my wife is a cancer patient, and she's had 6 surgeries since September, and she was able to travel with me to Arizona, but she was nervous because of the 3-hour flight, because she is a cancer patient. The last time we tried to get away for a vacation, she had emergency surgery in St. Croix. And we were there 6 days in a hospital rather than on the cruise ship, where we were supposed to be celebrating her at least temporary freedom from cancer. So I understand that there's trauma. I understand that there are things that will make you want to quit. And I also understand that we understand but the fringes of God's ways, as Job would say. As the mountains are above the sea, so his ways are higher than our ways, and his thoughts are higher than our thoughts. I think that there are some answers, Brian, that help us get in the category of why it might be that God would do some of these things. But ultimately, it's going to be out of my total and final grasp. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not in your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. So I believe that I can show you that God exists. And I believe that I can show you that the Bible is his word. Sometimes I believe I can show you what the Bible teaches. But if the peace of God passes all understanding, it's going to pass mine as well. So as we think about this, we need to do this with meekness and fear. 1 Peter 3:15. I think, therefore, the reasons for disbelief are sometimes rebellion, sometimes because of trauma, sometimes because people have taken philosophy classes, or they have had a teacher in college who was skeptical, and as college students, they are not allowed to challenge the teacher without maybe the fear of failing, and so they find themselves in a tough situation. And many times that produces unbelief.
Trying to figure out how to say this one.
English would be good.
Yes. In terms of daily living, why does it matter whether or not I believe in God? Can't I just live a good life?
Let me illustrate. 2 years ago, had a discussion about the historicity of Jesus with the best prepared atheist that I have ever had discussion with. A lot of atheists are not really all that academically prepared. This guy, Dr. Robert Price, he had 2 PhDs from Drew University. One in systematic theology and the other in textual criticism. Something happened to him in 1994. He was a preacher for another church, and then he became an atheist. So through the Warren Apologetics Center, if you want to buy the DVDs or whatever, I don't get anything from it. But we had this discussion. In his opening remarks, Brian, he said, we have a lot in common. He's talking to the audience, and he says, we have a lot in common. I believe in guns. I don't believe in abortion. And he said some other things like this. And then he said, I do believe that the United States is going in a negative moral direction. So I asked him, remember, it is a discussion where we're supposed to challenge one another. I wasn't trying to be unkind. So I asked him, how would he know that America was going in a negative moral direction if you don't believe in God? Because if I were to ask you, what is the width of the stage right here, you could give me a number, I could get a number, or some people in the audience could come up with a number here, but the way to settle that would be what? Measure it. Now, in order to measure it, we have to have some standard of measurement. So why in the world would an atheist say that this country is going in a negative moral direction when, as a matter of fact, he or she has no tape measure? Because if you are an atheist, about the best that you can do is say, well, I will let culture decide what right or wrong is, or I will let society decide what right or wrong is, or maybe I will use intuitionism, or maybe I will use evolution, or maybe I'll use whatever else. All of that stuff is irrelevant. All of that stuff, it just does not measure up. Because all that stuff can change. So, if we want to know whether or not the gas in Frankfurt is a little higher than the gas in Jackson, Tennessee, and the answer is, by the way, so far from what I've seen, yes. Okay, but if the gas here is a little more expensive than it is in Jackson, Tennessee, I look at the number and I measure it. The problem with people who say, what difference does it make, is that they say, well, I'm going to measure this to be right or wrong. But if they're challenged as to, well, where'd you get that measurement? How'd you decide that? Here's a little brief story from a graduate class at the University of Tennessee, a 7,000 level class, which is past the master's degree. And there are several of us sitting in this philosophy class. Our teacher has 2 PhDs, one in science and one in philosophy. And he's talking along about ecosystems. He's talking along about, loving the earth and conserving the earth, etc., etc. And then in the middle of class, he just says, so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so could happen here, but it would require murder, and we know that murder is wrong. Now, I knew that he was an atheist. And Dr. David Light, that some of you know, he was also in the class with me. He also knew he was an atheist. I looked at him, he looked at me as though, which one of us does not want to graduate? Okay, all right, because, okay, I don't remember which one it was. One of us raised our hands. And we said, Dr. So-and-so, I remember his name. Dr. So-and-so, did you just say, before we know that murder is wrong, and you're an atheist? And he said, yes, I said that. Okay, so here's the next question. Follow up. How do you know? Because murder is sometimes advantageous to evolution. So how do you know? And so we were expecting a guy with 2 PhDs to have a really educated answer. He said, because it is. And then he went right on. That's all it is. Because it is. I think that a person who doesn't believe in God has to say something like that. Because it is. Let's go on to the next question. But I think that reflective people need to think deeper than that. How do you know that murder is wrong? How do you know that it's wrong to be a serial killer, etc., etc.?
Okay. Thank you so much for your time tonight.